Hello guys and welcome to my channel. My name is David and this channel is gonna be all about bodybuilding and bringing you the best knowledge when it comes to building muscle. I'm not gonna lie, I am from Poland, so it's extremely hard to reach out to the people outside of my country. So if you are from United States or England or any country outside the Poland, please subscribe to my channel. Please share this to your friends and basically help me share this information with everyone who is interested in it. If you are from Europe and you like to support my channel and myself, please use the code Olszewski at www.propeptidy.pl and order the best quality peptides. They are shipping it throughout Europe, so don't worry about it. And without further ado, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome. Today's guest is someone who probably needs no introduction. Jewett, welcome.
Dawid, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. And you're in Poland or you're Polish and living somewhere else. Is that right?
No, I am Polish man living in Poland throughout whole my life.
Polish man living in Poland. Well,
Yeah,
hello to all the Poland fans. So thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it.
yeah. I text you like I don't know 8 months ago. I think something like that. But I've realized that probably my message just lost in like a thousands of others that you get every day. So I'm very I'm I wanted to say I'm proud of myself that I am so lucky that you find in the middle of that stack of the pile of the messages my message and answer it just because I'm not gonna lie, I lost the hope.
Well, I feel bad because yeah, DMs are it's a mess. If you saw the DM box, like so much can get missed. So I had an automated thing that came up like, hey, if it's about business, like email me here. And I had that up, but then that got annoying, so I took that down. But I ended up actually, you might like this, is I was going through YouTube and you popped up into my like feed, your podcast.
Oh my God.
With you were interviewing actually Justin Harris is who you were
Yeah.
interviewing. I was like, oh, check this out. And that's how you came about. And I heard my name mentioned on it. And you were like, he never got back to me. I was like, oh man. I was like, then I searched you, I found you. I'm like, hey, let's do this. I'm sorry that I even missed it, but man, I'm honored anytime that someone wants to listen to me talk about bodybuilding. So yeah,
Oh my God.
happy to be here. Glad we got linked up.
Right now I lost my tongue just because it's whoa, that's amazing. I never thought that someone like you just watch my randomly watch my video on YouTube because I can imagine that someone maybe like I sent you a link just because your name popped up or something like that, but just like a or like a from nothing you just found me. It's just this is destiny.
Yeah. Meant to be.
Yeah, of course. Man, I've originally invite you to speak about the same like I use the same questions like with every other coaches I have here. So get through the off season, the contest prep and stuff like that. But I've realized that there's a many controversy. I am not scared to use that word controversy with your person, just because there's a many people, including myself, that are not like mm, I don't know how to say it, like agree with your approach. Let's say it like that. But you mentioned it just right before I click the button record that you are actually are not probably the persons that the social media created from yourself just because yeah you see the shorts video the materials, not everyone just watched your seminars and stuff like that because it's costs and people are not liking to pay for anything, especially that if they have like a scratch of an information from the YouTube and they are that's enough for me. I
Sure.
am not know enough of that topic, so screw the rest. So I would like to. speak with you about the topic that I named. Is there something like a healthy or healthier bodybuilding, like a real bodybuilding? I am not, guys. If you're watching this, you weigh like a, I don't know, like 150 pounds or something like that, and you are a bodybuilding fan or something like that. This is not about you. This is about people on Olympia stage, on like a top-notch level. So this is for the competitors who are wanted to sacrifice everything just to get on the top. For those who are freaks, for those who are like their goal is to be the biggest and the craziest uh, and you name it, you know what I mean, like 80s, 90s freak factors coming back to the 21st century. So before I ask you all the questions that I am just put it on my phone here, I wanted to ask you first, how you feel, man? You recently win like a Atlanta Pro, and you look great. Uh, and you win your pass to the Olympia. So this is like just the biggest stage in the world. How you feel about it?
Yeah, I no, it feels amazing. And I in 2019 was my Olympia debut, and it was just riding a high, right? Like went in with no expectations. It's the first time I got fourth place. That was like mind blowing. And then I had kind of a down drop after that. Of course, like COVID years happened, shows were tough, and I had issues around like coaching and my physique, and it just kind of dropped down. So I took all of 2022 off to just improve, give myself rest from very long preps that I was on to come into this year. And really, the goal of this year was like, man, I just want to walk on stage better than I've been in 2019. If I win, I win. Like different there's kind of a turnover now of like this new younger crop coming through. So I was like, the placing is what it is. Sometimes it could be worse, but if I'm know for a fact I'm better, like that's my win. And man, backstage, like there was some mirrors and I saw myself before walking out. It gives me chills thinking about it because I knew in that moment, like I had it. I was nailed and the best I've ever been. And that was already the win. So to go out and actually win the show too was just frosting on the cake. And it's phenomenal to go back to Olympia feeling this fire again for bodybuilding because I had some doubts and like kind of where my progress and trajectory was. So it's really exciting for me. I love bodybuilding and being on stage competing. It's also why I'm going to jump in to do an open show, the Legion, just because I love the challenge of it. The timeline works out well and it should be a ton of fun. So, man, I'm on fire right now for bodybuilding. Like I'm so excited to go to the Olympia and do the next few shows I have lined up.
Man, tell me, you're win your 212 like Olympia pass, but isn't that allowed you to do the open?
No, no, yeah. So I have to. It's
Choose.
just separate divisions. So I would.
You cannot choose
So
it,
to
or
do
you
open,
can
yeah.
choose. You cannot
No,
choose.
like if you're qualified for both.
No, no. Oh, you have to qualify for the division. Oh, I thought you can
Yeah.
choose.
So,
Yeah, I know. Oh
oh no,
no. Yeah, that was
yeah, I have to
that.
go win the open show.
Yeah,
Um,
I just it just messed my with my head just because the Clarida 1 year win the both, and that's why he can choose. Okay.
yes,
Yeah, I
yeah.
thought that you can choose, and I wanted to ask you if you wanted to try your open debut in a hard way on the biggest stage in the world. That would be great.
That would be really cool. I would say if regardless of what happens at the open show, I'll still do 212 Olympia because I know like I'll still probably need more size for the open. And there's nothing like I want to be top three in the 212. That's my goal. I think if I could accomplish that, like I could walk away from 212 and never do it again because I beat my best in a sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want it to like give the places before the Olympia just because first of all, I'm not a coach. second of all, those people are crazy, and there's a lot of time to the stage. It's like a 14 weeks, 50 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think we're
so
now at 12 weeks.
some of those guys can actually grow. Some of those guys can actually get freaking peeled. So it's very hard to just say that you win, or you be the second place or the third place. I wish you to be the third or the second, just because the first one is probably out of your range. And this is I saying that just because you know that you probably fit better into the open, just because your structure is more like an open guy structure for me. So I think you are too tall
Probably
for the
so.
212. Yeah,
I'm a tall guy in it for sure.
yeah. With
I mean,
someone like Clarida,
you train to win it, right? But I mean, realistically, yeah. If I'm even in the top five, that's extremely well for my structure and stature and everything.
man, to be in the top 10 is for me. I cannot even imagine that. This is like you are a tenth guy in a world. This
Well,
is like
that's what was
freaking
my first
huge.
Olympia, man. It was just like
Yeah.
I couldn't care where I placed. Just walking on the stage, even if you're last place, you're walking on the Olympia stage, which was there's nothing like it. It was a highlight of my life. Like it feels like just the world is watching you at one moment, like you made it to Mount Everest, right? So any placing is well accomplished, but once you're there, you're like, all right, time to keep moving up.
Yeah, but it's always funny to me, like someone says, "Ah, he was 10."
Yeah, I know, right? Like, oh yeah, no big
Yeah,
deal.
yeah. He's just like there's a only 9 person in the world who's better than him. That's nothing. Yeah,
But that's the thing, Dawid, about doing like the open, right? Like even if I did the open, say I'm 15th, no one would talk about it.
yeah.
Like it
That
wouldn't
is
even be
crazy.
remembered. Who's 15th? But if I'm at the 212 and I was top five, that's remembered. So that's
Yeah,
kind of guides at least my decision for making the choice of what to do. If I say I was to qualify for both.
yeah. So wish you best, man. Wish you best. But
Thank you.
let's get into the topic of the today's conversation. Man, do you really believe that there's something like a healthy or even healthier approach to the bodybuilding?
Well, I mean, the thing with like with bodybuilding and health, it's kind of it's almost an oxymoron to really say
Yeah, it
like
is.
in modern bodybuilding like we want to keep health in the forefront along with our goals, but I see that shifting as you move up more in the competitive ranks, because you are now moving into like a career out of this to where the risk acceptance could be high, but it's also justifiable because of what it's now bringing into your life. So that's the scale that I operate on. And so you have to realize like when a lot of people are coming into, because we mentioned about this earlier, like kind of me getting labeled as like a safer use, coach or educator, that it's operates on a spectrum. And a lot of people coming into J3U, who is my audience, right? Like earlier on coaches, earlier on competitors. So a lot of like the general framework that I put out has them along this earlier on middle of the road path where there's is risk, but also we can manage the health side until we reach a point where we see this person absolutely could take it there and it makes sense to accept the high risk and really go for it. So I think risk reduction should always be in place, because just to be completely risk adverse and have zero care for your health, I feel like that's kind of a young man ignorant game that we all maybe first get
Yeah.
into. Like we've all been there. I've done crazy shit. I've done all of it. Like you name it. When I'm only thinking about my next show that's in 16 weeks, and then here I am, right? Like 8 years later, still being a pro bodybuilder. Like I can't do what I did back then. That's fucking crazy. So I think that's what I want to teach people is like, don't play all those cards right then. Let's move you up until it's justifiable. And so there's a thought process in all that. And no matter where you are in the spectrum, either way, we should be trying to reduce your risk, because this stuff ultimately, if you take steroids beyond the physiological level, you are exposing yourself to risk. What the impact is, when that's going to happen, question mark. We don't know. And that's kind of the scary part around it. For some, it's very earlier on, which is terribly sad. So I think we all should just be not in denial and be aware. And if there's certain areas where we can reduce those risks, then we should. So there should be a thinking man's approach to PED usage, bodybuilding just in general. I won't keep rambling, but I think either way, if you're trying to be a very large human, we see a good correlation or association, I should say, with death, morbidity, and mortality with being a very large human. So whether you're natural and you want to be as enormous as possible, now you add steroids on top of that and go beyond. Yeah, just being a large human in bodybuilding is not going to be healthy. So it's straining all systems, cardiovascular, kidneys, your brain, all for the long term. So is there a healthy way to bodybuild? I'd say no, but we could reduce the risk and not just be ignorant to what we're doing.
Okay, I'm not gonna I don't want to this podcast turn into like a PED stock only. I know that
Sure,
PED
sure.
is like a huge deal in bodybuilding, just because telling that PEDs is just an additional thing is a lie. It plays a very big role, but this is not
Absolutely.
most important thing. So let's just first talk about the training aspect, just because right now you can see that people go nuts in both ways. Some guys are doing like a, I don't know, like a crazy Branch Warren training, but without all the talents that Branch have. So basically just rip it and grip it, kinds of shit. And the opposites, like one's just doing like a cable stuffs and crazy TikTok drills and stuffs that's just simply not built an ounce of the muscle in any human being ever. So where's your like a middle ground stays? What's your approach on training for those who are just started and for those who are advanced? Just because the difference is gonna be a huge. The basics are gonna be basics. So this is like a thing that you do like for your whole career, like I don't know, some sort of bench. Either it's like a machine or like a free weight bench, either it's dumbbell or barbell or anything, like some sort of squats and stuff like that, doing some heavy, like a 6 to probably 12 reps, but other stuffs like additional work when it's time to put it in, and make it really play into your like a advantage, not disadvantage. If you understand what I mean, just because I probably complicated it so much.
Well, yeah. Let me. So, like, when I have a client like come through, and I only work with competitors at this point. So my first thing to do is, what is the goal here? And there's a visual goal in hand, right? Like, we want to put someone on stage with certain development in their body parts. So I go and do a needs analysis first, which I take pose by pose. And I look at each pose and I make a list of weak points. The body parts are like middle of the road, and then there's strong body points. And as you go pose by pose, you'll quickly paint the picture of where we need to fill the gaps. And most of the time, people are coming in with, my arms are weak. How do I grow those? Usually it's some issue, right? It's a weak point they want to bring up, because at this level, they've been training. And like you said, a lot can work. If you're training hard, you'll put some muscle on, but at some point you're going to kind of meet that bottleneck. And that's when you start seeing weak body parts form. But that's usually the at least the first part is like, we have a visual goal. So let's break apart the poses. What is judges' feedback? And that'll see like what that emphasis should be on around training, if it should. Because if we do have someone that earlier on, well, hell, they just need to make everything bigger. So I know you have people that come like, I want big arms. It's like, dude, your whole body is small. You just need a bigger body. So that will dictate like where I take that training plan. And then from that point, I also like to see where they're coming from. And we can apply that across the board, nutrition, PEDs, whatever it may be. I have to see where they're at and what's that kind of response is before we know where to go from there. So I don't have like, here's the John Jewett protocol, throw that at them. It should still be based around what they have been doing. And a lot of times what they have been doing is an enjoyability aspect and a preference aspect. And if you have that built in, because that's when we all first got into training, is to really enjoy it and have fun. You need that there. So what I find is people that come to me usually already have a mentality that caters around like what I kind of have a preference for, because I am a lower volume, higher effort individual. And so I get a lot of those clients anyway that connect with that. But that's not to say that I can't shift them in different directions. So what I do is I look at their current training plan and I see how well it matches up to what their body part breakdown is. And if that makes sense. I also like some initial training footage sent to see what the quality of that work is too. Because you very well could have someone like doing a squat that looks nothing like a squat. And you're like, I don't know why my quads aren't bigger. I squat 400 pounds. It's like, oh yeah, you shouldn't be squatting like this, or we should move you to this exercise. Or it also gives me a good gauge of effort level too, because that weighs into this equation. So once I have these things, right, I have their needs analysis, I have what they're currently doing, and I have kind of an idea of what experience level they are training wise. Because you could have a pro that's not an experienced trainer. They just genetically have got enough stimulus along the way to grow. So from there, I can build out a plan. Now, usually that will be seeing what they're, because we know like the main mechanism around hypertrophy, what causes a muscle to grow at the fiber level is mechanical tension. So there has to be a certain amount of tension present in the muscle. And that's usually those sets that are approaching close proximity to failure. So we can count it as just, your one set. And we need to make sure this one set is very high quality, right? We standardize form and everything. So beyond the mechanistic, what causes growth, the main driver here is volume. So that is I think the largest, least programming variable across is how much volume should someone do? Because this is what we see, right? Low volume or high volume. What do I do? And really for the individual, it should be, what is the right volume that's going to make them grow? And where that shifts from low to high is like, hey, if you want to be a higher effort guy and train a little closer to failure, well, that volume needs to come down, because on a per set basis, it's more stimulating, also more fatiguing. Now, if you're a guy like, hey man, the mental side, I can't take it there, those last reps, but in turn, you might have to do a little bit more volume. Now, I think there is the middle ground, like you said. You should not train to failure all the time and only do low volume. You should also never train to failure and do excessively high volume. There's going to be exercises that are going to cater really well to failure. There's going to be exercises that cater real well to staying away from failure. Like, Dawid, when I ask you, like, how many times in your life do you squat with a barbell on your back and have to crawl out from the barbell? Right? Probably kind of rarely, right? You're like, that's extremely dangerous, John. And then I feel a lot in my back. I don't feel it in my quads. So technically you're not training to failure. So there's exercises where that should apply, where it shouldn't apply. So we have this amount of volume now, and all we need to do is make sure that it's a sufficient amount to make this person grow in the body parts they need. So for their strong body parts, we might have a little lower volume, so we could allocate more of this volume to the weaker body parts. And that volume for the week is what we'll have. So we'll have chest needs 8 sets and legs need this many sets. And then that'll dictate from there the split design. So I'm not the push-pull legs guy, but a lot of times it works out that way, or the upper-lower guy. It just depends on the volume level they need to train at and to organize that volume across the week. So that might be a bro split. It might be training once per week. It might be training twice per week. But typically when sessions get too long and the quality of volume drops within a session, we might need to move that to training twice a week. So bringing up weak body parts, a lot of times that is getting hit maybe 2 or 3 times per week. So that's kind of how I initially would set up a program, is organizing it on what looks good on paper and what should make someone grow off of what they're currently doing. If I see like they had really shitty form to begin with, I probably won't be changing their volume much and just trying to make that volume quality really, really high. Because you see guys that sometimes they're not even getting stronger, like load and reps on the bar, but they're growing. So you're like, oh, how is that possible? It's because that direct fiber, bone to bone tension is improving by the quality of their reps. So I weigh highly into trying to improve someone's form and execution and standardize that. And then see where that takes them before we just throw a bunch of volume at them, because it'd just be throwing a bunch of more shitty work at them too. Now from there, that's when it breaks down to like what rep range to work in and all that, like the nuance things, because I think that gives you the big tenets of what's important. Have enough volume and train close enough proximity to failure. The rep range from there for hypertrophy, 6 to like 20 reps can make hypertrophy occur. I'd say most of my programming is between 8 to 15 reps. And whether that is, an 8 rep set, then a 15, or a 15 and an 8, that's the nuance that probably doesn't matter a lot, given that all those sets are of high quality to close proximity to failure. I think that is the big framework around hypertrophy programming. And basically to shift that into, I know we're going to get into prep, but you have like a bank, just like you keep your money in. And in that bank, there's only so much money that you can borrow out. And that is your recovery bank, right? So at any given time in the off season, you have this bank full of money and you're spending on volume. I'm doing the 20 sets of squat today. I'm doing 10 sets of bench press. Eventually you run out and you owe the money back, the bank back all the money. So you only have so much to recovery to work with. So we have to train within our recovery capacity, of which how much is you have to spend within your bank account, basically. So we're going to have times of the year where that bank account's going to decrease, right? Maybe we don't make as much money, or maybe you have poor sleep, you have stress at work, to where now your training volume needs to come down a bit, or times when it'll need to come back up. And so that's how that programming should be periodized around modulating volume across the year, and monitoring as an individual what that feedback is to make those shifts. All right, Dawid,
Yeah.
I just rambled for way too long, so
No.
bring me back to a question.
You're right, but everything you've just said sounds brilliant. Sounds very like a knowledgeable and great. But do you really think that is applicable to the people? Just because you seen those guys who are listening about the studies about the hypertrophy and stuff like that, but remember those guys from the era of Ronnie and stuff like that. They are not counting anything. They are just busting their ass off. They're doing sets for the 20, 50, 100 reps, and they grew very well. And the first component that they have is just an effort. And this is something that is lacking those days. And I think that's the third thing that makes you grow. It's not like a volume or intensity in any means. Just because intensity doesn't mean that you are going into the failure. Just because for someone intensity can be like a marker of intensity. For example, reps in reserve. Those shit I
Sure.
cannot handle. The reps in reserve is something that
Relative
I
versus
yeah
absolute.
I don't believe in it. It's bullshit.
But you do it. But you do it, Dawid.
Yeah, I
Whether
do.
whether you count it or not, it's
Yes,
happening.
I know, but I don't believe in putting in on the plan. So if you tell something, do like a 3 sets reps in reserve, that doesn't mean he's gonna do 3 reps in reserve. Probably he's gonna do a lot more, and this is why I believe in like a failure training, just because most of those people don't even go to failure. Like you said, there are like an exercise like squats that is not smart to do into the failure, but mechanical failure is a failure too. So if you cannot finish the next rep properly because you're I don't know like a bending like a bone or something like that, so you probably are in like a good range of intensity to finish the set. But you see, I don't want to like said that everything you said is wrong because it's right. But you really need uh, someone who is like I don't know, like a really into a training data and stuff like that to really be like to really enjoy those kind of training. Just because I think that the most important thing is to just go to the training and doing your best. What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I think, well, I think we're kind of laying out the framework of like what causes a muscle to grow, and there's a
Yeah.
range to work in with that. And
I know it's
it depends who
semantics.
we're
It's
talking to.
semantics. I know.
It
And
it,
yeah,
it
yeah,
can be. It can be. And I don't want it to be either, because like I started off like I would train all out, and that's what I like to do. I don't program RIR for the most part. You tell guys, hey, we're deloading, like keep a few reps in the tank. A lot of people won't train hard enough, but usually that's not a lot of my clients that walk through the door. A lot of times, guys at this level, they already know how to train hard. It's more so directing that effort to be more
yeah,
precise. So that's probably the biggest mistake I see in all the high level guys. Because we see, like you mentioned, Branch, Ronnie,
yeah,
these guys just train hard, right? Like, what else do you do beyond that? But we probably could have taken those guys and made their sets maybe more precise. Maybe they would have got more out of each set. Maybe at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't even matter, right? They're just such freaks, right? They're going
yeah,
to grow anyway. I think intuitively, those guys are pretty sharp. And in turn, like we see that progression happen over time. Like, oh, hey, I get more connection here. They learn to improve their technique. Load and reps increases over time anyway. So, and I think they probably have more volume that gets added in anyway too. I think intuitively those things probably did happen. But I think if we had like guys like that, if we were could make their sets a little bit more precise, we might. It's a risk reduction thing we talked about, right?
yeah, of
Maybe we
course.
could have extended their careers, like maybe less injuries. Like that's something to think about. In no means is it pushing out on sets. I want you to take it there, and that's what I do believe in. Like we should push guys
Yeah,
there,
me too, me too. This is
but it
something
should
that
be precise.
this is something that I am not even like I'm never gonna say that it's opposite just because I'm doing the same. I'm trying to bust my ass off, of course. Probably in 3 years from now, I'm gonna laugh about it, thinking that I was working hard, but this is how it is. Yeah, but you see, I'm thinking about more like a mental aspect of it, just because today's era, guys, just too much thinking about how many reps I should do, how many sets I should do, if I'm gonna be enough recover for the next session and stuff like that. And I think if you have enough calories, if you like manage your sleep well, if you are well hydrated and doing everything like on 100%, there's not such a thing like overtraining. Unless you're doing silly stuff like 7 days a week training or something like that, just because it's stupid. I don't believe in that. But if you are doing, for example, like a 2 on 1 off, or 1 on 1 off, or 2 on 1 off, 3 on 1 off, and stuff like that, and you're sleeping well, you eat enough calories, you're supplementing well, either it's PEDs or supplements like a normal supplements and stuff like that, you should be fine, man. I don't believe today's guys like, oh, I'm always tired. Maybe just because you're mentally weak, man. Maybe this is that's the reason, not your training. Maybe you are just a lazy bitch. What do you think about it?
uh, there's probably a balance in thought there a bit, I guess, because overtrain could exist, but I think it's
Yeah, of
much
course.
overstated. Like you are saying, like if I was to say, Dawid, let's go double your training volume, and you're going to train every single day, you might get a little fucked up. And at some point, you're like, John, I've had enough. Like, well, man, just go eat more food. You're like, I can't eat enough to overcome
Ask Milos about
training
it.
double volume.
Ask Milos about
I know. No, I
it.
know. I've heard his opinion, but if that's the case, why don't we train for like 6 hours a day? Most bodybuilders don't do that. Maybe 2 hours, right? And we have some rest days in there. We know there's a certain amount of work that's within reason, and we push it hard, because why don't you keep going then?
Yeah.
You would probably overtrain, because otherwise you just keep
the
training.
sorry that I interrupt you, but you know who is the greatest example for that? The Martin Fitzwater and the Branch Warren. Just because the Martin says himself that when he was working with the Branch, that was something that it was not suited very well with him. He by itself work like a very precise, very hard but precise, and the
Sure.
styles of the Branch is something that makes him like a, I don't want to say that he was like a more prone to injury, let's say like that. It was
Yeah.
just not safe for him and not that great. Just because I think that the Branch has like a, I don't know, like a superhuman like a connection with the muscle, and probably by ripping it, he probably feel more contraction than me using like a ping dumbbell on the biceps curl. So probably that's the reason why he grew so well doing the half reps and stuff like that. But probably that's not the good approach for 99.9% of the people in the world. So I know that. But when it comes to the overtraining, I know it exists just because during the COVID, I trained like a 7 days a week, like a 3 hours training and stuff like that. And I cannot eat, cannot sleep. And I basically was like a living zombie. And that was an overtraining for sure. But
It's a degree of
yeah,
it. Like you can go pretty far. Like, hey, we see in prep, like we can maintain strength and we're like in a very fatigued state. But I think we fool our. I hate doing breaks. I hate deloads. I hate all this stuff, because I love to train. And you're like, I can still make a progression. You like force a rep out. And you're like, if you just took a step back, rested a little bit, you come back even stronger and better. We see that kind of
of course.
happen. I still align with you. Like people, there's programs out there where you deload like every 4 weeks, like take a whole week off. And even you'll like this. There's some latest research. They train guys for 9 weeks. One group had a deload 1 week off. The other group didn't. The group that didn't take the deload grew more. Go figure.
Yeah.
So I think there's time to utilize this tool, but people run with it too far and trying to find like what's the least amount that I need to train to make this happen. So everything's within context, and assessing the individual for their preference, but also like, hey, what's your goal? And that has to, if you're coming to me like I want to be a pro bodybuilder, we're going to push towards that goal over what sometimes might be a little bit preferential.
Yeah, of course. That makes sense for me perfectly. Yeah.
We could probably talk all day just about the training piece.
Yeah, definitely. This is why I'm gonna change the subject because we have like a limited time for that. I this is like just a brief, quick question. What do you think about the cardio in the off season? Just because some guy says that it's gonna hinder your growth, and some says it's even gonna help with the growth. And I know what you're thinking, just because I am on your side, and I've watched the movies and stuff like that, but I wanted people to hear it from you.
Yeah. I mean, we first outline it's all about the needs analysis, right? Like what is the goal? And that has to weigh out above what you're coming to for me as a coach. So I don't think your plan should look like an endurance athlete comparatively to what should be primarily resistance training. So I would say like in an off-season period, we shouldn't see more cardio sessions than we're seeing resistance training sessions. I think as that starts to escalate up, and also those sessions are even getting closer to in proximity to resistance training, there is a concurrent effect that does occur. And we see this clearly in the literature that you're giving a signal to make a muscle grow in resistance training. When you do cardio, you give a signal for muscular endurance adaptations. These signals can cancel each other out, and that is what is concurrent training. Now, there's a balance to it, because if you have so much resistance training there, like a little bit of cardio, it's not going to be that interference. And it's really when those sessions are really close together So another consideration point is what level is the bodybuilder to? If you're like a small bodybuilder that's extremely active, I have some guys that have like jobs where they're walking 15, 20,000 steps per day. That plus resistance training, I think they're getting enough out of the cardiovascular needs for health, but also for training purposes as well. Because I feel like you're probably not running into the bottlenecks of being a large bodybuilder in your training until you are a large bodybuilder. But I think there's definitely good rationale to keep in at least 3 days of cardio if you're going to be this large bodybuilder individual. And I see that being an amount that's not going to be more than your training sessions and also have so much interference with hypertrophy. But I do see it could be beneficial because once you get so big, the cardiovascular component in your training becomes your limiting factor, like on some of the leg training sessions to where you're gasping for air, you're trying to get to your next set, and you're just not as efficient from a work capacity standpoint anymore. And if you're not efficient work capacity wise, everything's more fatiguing, and that volume, that work at the end kind of drops off in quality. So I think it's important to keep that aspect up. More importantly, somewhat more importantly, because we're talking about risk reduction, is the health aspect of doing some cardio, especially becoming very large around blood pressure control, lipid management, I think blood glucose control. I am more in favor of doing a high volume hit, or sorry, I should say low volume hit. So doing like a 1 minute all out effort, 1 minute off for like 5 sets. But that's only like one time a week, because more than that, I see this being too taxing for someone that's large. So I might have like 2 steady states, 1 low volume hit session. Then I like to keep a baseline of step count up just to keep someone active. I think that aids with digestion purposes and keeping a good energy flux in for having someone that's rather than, I've done off seasons where you sit on the couch all day and you have like 2,000 steps total and you don't eat as much food because of it, because you are just sitting around. So that's where I usually would lie for everyone. But again, there's the extremes of like, I have guys that are eating like, man, 6,000 calories and they have like even 10,000 step counts. Like, man, we won't be doing cardio probably. And that's kind of the realism for some of these individuals. But as a baseline, to keep a little bit of cardio in. Yeah.
Do you really think that 3 times a week is sufficient for bodybuilder? I say like above 100 kilo bodybuilder just because this is where the cardio is really needed for the heart
Yeah.
health.
Sure. Yeah. I think we could look at like the American Heart Association, like recommendations for activity of being 150 minutes per week
Yeah,
to
but this
see
this
at
is
least
not
a bit.
suitable for bodybuilders. No,
Why not?
man, come on. Like
Well,
those studies
that's,
those studies probably are for like an
that's,
average person. I think I don't think that is suitable for someone who's I don't know like a 250 pounds, like 120 kilos guy who is most like a 90% of his body is a muscle and his heart is larger than the normal. He has like a probably like an elevated blood pressure or like a managing it with the some like medications and stuff like that. I think that it's smarter to do it a little bit more. I am not gonna argue with you, but this
because
is what I believe
150
in.
minutes is 150 minutes a week is 5 sessions per week of 30 minutes of like steady state cardio. And part of what does count into that is like you can absolutely count
Oh,
step count into that recommendation as well. So if you, because you
yeah,
see a
but
decrease in morbidity and mortality when you reach high step counts, and if you're 300-pound bodybuilder, just walking outside is like a stressor for health adaptations.
yeah, but you say 150 minutes a week, but then you say like a 3 times a week session. So I do you do like
On
a
top of
40 minute sessions 3 times a week?
yeah. So well, let me go back on one thing. For one, for a bodybuilder, this is needs based because you brought up some specific conditions, right? We're monitoring blood pressure, blood glucose, lab
Yeah.
work. What is the need of this individual? And that might escalate up the need for higher cardio duration. If we're not seeing these things, that might mean we don't need quite as much. So I don't want it to be put in a bucket of this is John's approach for everyone, because people keep
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that with a lot of things. It's on a spectrum that operates here. Some general framework might be a starting point here. So keeping a high step count absolutely does weigh into decreasing morbidity mortality. Now, 150 minutes of moderate exercise, it also can be 75 minutes of vigorous exercise. So we can have our HIIT session count into that. We can also have more of our steady state session count into that. Now, this is also, we bring up the risk. You want to be the biggest bodybuilder in the world, or you want to be the healthiest bodybuilder in the world? Well, we might have to shift these around if you're having to do so much cardio to keep up with health metrics that you're now taking away from, maybe you have an unsustainable amount of food, or it is impeding your training at that point. It's just things to weigh in and consider. So I just want more of a thinking process around assess the individual and also their risk and how much cardio you might need to put in for that person to align with what they're willing to accept for that risk. I would say 3 days a week is just a start point. That might be 5, but also is going to be dependent on like how active and how many steps I have that individual getting into.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, that's that's better. Let's say like that.
Now, let me, to your point though, I don't like to write off research and studies because it just throw them out the window, because it
Yeah,
does give us an average for the general population of a start point. That, because otherwise we throw them all out, we'd have nothing, because we don't have a lot of this stuff in bodybuilders. Like, what's the cardio recommendation for the bodybuilder? It's like, yeah, we don't really have anything like that. So a lot of stuff can give us a good average of where we might start, and that might be a little bit more. And some things we're looking at for bodybuilders, or it could be less.
yeah, of course. Man, what do you think about the carb cycling during the off season? And I mean like not like an I don't know, not giving an additional intra shake in the rest days, but like a proper carb cycling. For example, like a training, non-training days, or even like a medium, low, and hard carb days when it comes to the like prioritizing body parts or something like that. What do you think about it?
Yeah, sure. Like, just so you know, like my first coach ever was Shelby Starnes, and I was uh I did all the carb cycling. I low, moderate, high days. Yeah.
Would really love to speak with him on the podcast. Uh, in
Oh, right
case
on.
he gonna watch it.
He hears this. Yeah, and so I did all those rotational days like that with very like extreme. If you want to say it's extremes, I mean, it's very high carb, very low fats to pretty much very low carb and higher fats. I've done it all. I've done it different ways. I worked with Matt Jansen for a while. It's where I grew a lot with him. We had very small shifts in training days to non-training days. It was basically like you don't have your intra shake, and that's kind of really all the change that there is. And so I think it all can work. I think it's so nuanced, the nutrient timing aspect, because I think you have a hierarchy of nutrition. For one, the base of the principle is like what you're able to even adhere to. Then from there, your total calories, that's what's going to matter most for the day. From there, your macronutrient breakdown. From there, likely we could probably argue like those food sources choices, because that weighs into your micronutrient distribution. At the very top is probably how do you want to time these nutrients? And this is where we see the biggest arguments in bodybuilding is, should you have intra shakes or not? Or should I have protein like 1 hour or 2 hours after training? Like, go back to your base of the pyramid if this really even matters. So likely if you hit your total protein intake for the day or total carb intake for the day, it likely doesn't matter much. And I think for the week as the entirety, I also think it doesn't matter that much. And I would let the individual preference cater into it. I think also for certain clients, certain people, man, to have these rotating patterns, it's it's hard for them to adhere to from a preparation standpoint. Others, no problem. They actually like it. And I think some people like having the variance in their diets, and also a consideration point for digestibility is you might have someone that is a lot hungrier on training days, and to have the same amount of food on an off day is very challenging to eat. So we might shift that around based on digestibility and some of that preference and hunger signaling. That weighs in more of my nutrition decisions versus that there's an anabolic or decreasing like fat accumulation advantage to carb cycling. And I feel like I won't bring up studies anymore, but basically, if you
Mhm.
overfeed someone in a surplus, whether it's carbohydrate or fat based, they will gain body fat. So it's purely managing the correct surplus across the week. From a coaching standpoint, you might find it a little easier to manage someone when the days are a little bit closer in accordance. Now, as a preference standpoint for myself, I do lean into having more food on a training day. So having, and what we see like for a resistance training session, man, a female might only burn 150 calories, while like a large male might get up to like 800 calories. So to have the justification that I need to fuel like another 2,000 calories on a train day for someone that's resistance training, it's very hard to justify that then to go to the extreme the next day. Because one thing you might consider, Dawid, right, in carb cycling is when does someone train? When should the high day be? Like, what if I train first thing in the morning? Should I have my high day after and a bunch of food before? And then I'm coming off a low day. Should I have the high day right before and I train in the morning? So I think you have to also consider resistance training session. Your protein synthesis rates are elevated for like 24 hours after. Glycogen synthesis rates are elevated for like 36 hours after. So I have those things, 36 and 24. So I mean, feeding across this huge window, it probably all evens out. If you consume enough carbs, you're going to be completely glycogen replenished. Because when do you train the next body part? Oh yeah, I hit chest, and then I hit it maybe 3-4 days later. It's like glycogen will be completely restored. We also see you don't even completely glycogen deplete during resistance training in most cases. So to have like, I need 200 grams of carbs to fuel this big, long marathon I'm about to run of resistance training, my CrossFit training, it's probably not liable either. So I think some slight elevation is justifiable, but the extremes are probably not for the goal of fueling training, recovering from training, especially in an off-season state wherein we're such a surplus. And I know with the carb cycling extremes, some of the rationale there, but I again think if you averaged it all out, it probably would be a wash. Like you're going to dry a lot of food, drive up insulin a lot on your training days, but then to counter that, you're having to go really low on the low days. You probably get the same net effect having more even keel. So that's where I lie. At least from programming, I usually start just a little bit of a shift up on training to off days, and I don't do the large rotations and to the extreme of that extent.
But I was listening, but are we talking bodybuilding right now? Just because I think that this approach is great, but more likely for maybe like a natural guys or something like that, or like a low level bodybuilders. Just because for those who are on a high level, this probably gonna like a IGF, GH, insulin, like a long acting insulin and stuff like that. All the protocols that's important to like be precise with your nutrition during the not only the week but during the day. So saying that there's probably no need to eat on like certain macros on a certain meals, but because this the total for the day is the most important thing. It's probably not that suitable. I think just because what if you're gonna use like for example Antus on your high carb days just to bring up some more like of your lagging body parts, for example, or using a high amounts of the insulin during the like the window of the training, so like peri workouts, let's say it like that, because we both know that this is something that is commonly used. This is like a staples for bodybuilding. So it's not like there are bodybuilders who are not using insulin. There's not. Like there's no bodybuilders who are not using GH and stuff like that. And this everything like I think it's matters just because For example, if we bump it up the insulin so much during the high days, that the low day next day might just give it a break for our guts, for our pancreas, and like a maybe even a little bit slightly improve on the insulin sensitivity. Maybe it's more like a bro science because it's probably one day is not enough for that, but maybe even on the psychological level, if you're not like pounding your guts with so much carbs. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think you are giving some very specific scenarios
Yeah,
around like
like I
individual
said
cases,
at
right?
the beginning, it's just because we are talking about the high level bodybuilders, not like a so it's probably important to cover that just because there
Sure.
if we're talking about safer bodybuilder approach. We are not talking about the guys who are, I don't know, 75, 80 kilos, just because what they are doing is safe anyway. It's probably like a minimal tests and that's all. So
Sure.
it's maybe just a little bit above the tier two level. So and that's enough for them. But for someone who is at the top and he is just battling for that, I don't know, maybe half a kilo a year, the little things are important, I think.
I think some of them are and some of them aren't.
Okay.
And for one, we rewind back of like what we were asking here is like for the entirety of the day, is cycling from a high carb to a low carb amount. Do I do that and think that that has an approach that is a greater impact over maybe a less cyclic approach? And I would argue that I don't think that that is needed unless someone really prefers that. Now, that's not to say how I break up my individual day, because to say like, hey, just eat protein whenever or carbs whenever, you're putting words in my mouth when you do that, because that's not the case either.
No, no, no.
And that's also not the case of
I don't
saying
want it to.
food
Sorry for
qualities
that.
don't matter. No, you're okay. But also we talk about you bringing up insulin and things like this too, which have a lot of context that we do need to build things around of how I deploy those compounds to give some context. Because, for instance, like when I worked with Jansen, like I jumped like 30 pounds of stage weight the year that I worked with Jansen, and we didn't cycle carbs to that extent, right? So there's a lot that can work around that. And I, not to speak of like an argument of authority, I consider myself a higher level bodybuilder in my approach. And trust me, I do things to win the Olympia. I don't do things to be healthy in a sense. But with that being said, if we get down to the individual day, and if I was to like program nutrition to try to optimize anabolism for any level bodybuilder, but let's, the big level pro, absolutely, like protein is the biggest thing is going to be driving protein accrual, net protein breakdown decrease. So absolutely having some bolus of protein spread out every 3 to 4 hours, and that's going to look like probably 5 to 6 meals a day of what we typically see in every single bodybuilder. And what I want to say, Dawid, if you zoomed out to my approach and all these other coaches, I bet it's going to look very similar. Just some little nuanced things that are a little different, but sure.
I just want to say that I realize that it's looked like I'm attacking you or something like that. It's not like that, and
No,
I'm not saying like that, like you say something or do something. This is just more like I know what people think about your approach, like from the outside, and I just
okay.
wanted to scoop it out, everything, just like I put it into the perspective, just because I know how you eat. I watch all of your videos and stuff like that, so I know that you are not doing some like if your macro shit that you are like filling out your protein for the day on the last meal, eating like a
Yeah.
300 grams of protein. I know that, but I just wanted to, and for to be honest, I don't believe in a huge carb cycling for bigger guys, just because I think those days where you are almost on the deficit of the calories, if you are not eating the carbs, it's probably going to hinder your recovery. So it's not good. It's like the huge differences between the carb cycles is good for like a lower weight guys. That's good for them, but not for a guy who is 150 kilos. probably, but this is more like I just wanted to scoop it out more of your knowledge. This is why I am so like
Oh no, absolutely. I
yeah.
actually I truly appreciate your questions. I've been on podcasts where everyone's very agreeable, and I think this makes great conversation. So I've been doing this. I don't feel offended or like challenged that way. I uh, I love what I do. So I mean, I'm glad you're asking questions like this, and I want to be able to explain them too. And one thing I always remember when I did work with Jansen, and I bring up Jansen because Jansen's known for making some guys really big. Is he always? I asked him like, why do the rest day calories stay so high? And he said, your rest day is for recovery. So we need to keep fueling recovery. He's like, yeah, you trained yesterday, but all that is bleeding into your rest day. So you don't want to go super low food on your rest day either. And that had always stuck with me. Um, now with like, yeah, spreading food out, I think, spread out your protein. I still like carbohydrate wise. When I will start, well, let me go back because we talk about fats. I do keep fats relatively lower on a spectrum because I do believe like for one, carbohydrate after protein is going to be probably the most next anabolic driving thing, and it fuels our training. We're anaerobic athletes, if you want to call us that. So I push carbohydrate next up after about a set amount of fat until a point where that food volume from carb is so high that I need to make the meal a little bit more calorie dense and also probably more palatable. It's hard to get
Yeah.
down 500 grams of just rice. And so I will, after I kind of have a spread, I will start shifting more carbs pre and post workout and intra workout. And those amounts can come up pretty high. Eventually we get to a point, and I'm going to get to your point about insulin, and you have someone using growth hormone along the way. We know with how growth hormone works, it can create a state of insulin resistance that I'm monitoring blood glucose in these athletes. And if we see this start to creep up some because of all the factors going on, increases of inflammation, oxidation, GH, high food amounts, that the need for a demand of insulin is there beyond what the body can produce. So we need to start covering that with an exogenous form of insulin. And that's when that comes into play. So insulin is paired at a time when we need it in accordance with the food amount. It's not the other way around. You don't add insulin when you're 200 pounds and eating 200 grams of carbs. It's not going to make you grow more. Insulin is a modulator in the growth process. It doesn't necessarily create it on its own, because you have to think of it conceptually too. Like you can't super physiologically dose insulin like you could testosterone. Like I produce 200, whatever, say we're producing 200 milligrams of test per week. I'm going to go take 1,000 milligrams a week. Say you're producing 40 units of insulin per day. I'm going to go take 200 units. It's like, yeah, you're going to fucking die. Like you have to pair that with food. And if you pair that with food, you're going to get super fat. And that's how guys get really fat on insulin. They're building their diets around their high insulin usage when it should be the other way around. Insulin comes in based around a need to manage blood glucose and help with partitioning that. So usually I bring in Atlantis as a basal first, and then I start building in some fast acting around training when we start really pushing those amounts up around that time window, because that's when I think more of the nutrient timing absolutely starts to matter. Because if we're
Yeah.
taking insulin around training, hell yeah, you need a lot of carbs around training to facilitate that. And that's the time when we're expending the most energy too. So you're going to have the most carbohydrate around those moments. But again, this is when some guys are they're you have to be pretty big by that point when you're at that level.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned the basal insulin. Do you use it like every training days, or is more like only on the like body part that you want to prioritize?
Well, I guess that comes back to the point of like, does a basal insulin make you grow more than the own basal insulin that you're producing? It's a
Yeah,
valid
but
question, right?
yeah, I know, but probably the answer is if you're stuck in it with the GH, it probably does, just because it's bumping up a little bit more of the IGF production. Maybe not muscle, just because no one probably doing the biopsy of the muscle IGF, but the
Sure.
systemic IGF for sure. But I was more curious about it just because you said you compare the basal insulin and what from what I've know, the using of the basal insulin like every day could very quickly hinder your insulin sensitivity. So this is why I asked, just because this was curious for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So the with I want to make sure everyone considers like growth hormone and insulin being separate drugs,
Yeah,
and deployed absolutely could be separately.
of
So
course.
you might not be using growth hormone and have pushing food and require insulin to manage blood glucose. You very well could be elevating growth hormone. And how growth hormone works is it is going to liberalize fatty acids from adipose tissue, and also it helps you produce more glucose out of the liver. So growth hormone's job is to bring substrate into the bloodstream. Then GH converts to IGF-1, and then that all gets pulled into the muscle for growth, recovery, repair. So growth hormone is going to drive a lot of blood glucose into the bloodstream, and that's why people get insulin resistant running a lot of growth hormone. And it's doing this all day long. So what you'll see in your athletes that you coach with this is their fasting blood glucose is elevating. So it's not just at one particular meal time. This is an all day event occurring. And all day you also have a level of insulin that you're producing. And when you can look up we can look at diabetics, because you could see a similar metabolic profile in people with metabolic syndrome, like you could with a growth hormone using bodybuilder, with
Yeah.
elevated blood glucose, insulin resistance occurring, inflammation. So the first line therapy of insulin deployment in a diabetic is a basal insulin, because you want to bring down fasting blood glucose. Now, the thing about this is the treatment for diabetes, or not the treatment for it, but the first line medication to control diabetes is insulin. We are not giving diabetics insulin to cause more diabetes, right? So insulin does not cause insulin resistance. I've seen people state that, and that's false. It's probably more of the mechanisms behind it, which is a constant state of inflammation, causing cells to become less responsive to the insulin signaling, requiring more insulin. Now, they happen concomitantly, right? You have more insulin, you have insulin resistance, but the mechanism, it's not taking insulin. We treat this with using insulin. So the what you see though is when you do replace some of your basal insulin with an exogenous insulin like Atlantis or a Tresiba or something like this, that you actually remove the strain off the pancreas from having to constantly produce so much insulin over time. And you actually do improve insulin sensitivity by just using insulin, basal. So I'm not saying fully replace all of your basal insulin with Lantus, because you're eventually you're going to run into a big problem, because putting insulin in, you're not solving the insulin resistance that occurring with high growth hormone, high amounts of food. You're just trying to partition the state a little bit, modulate it, but this should be kind of the red flag. Like, hey, we can put this insulin in for so long, but eventually we're going to have to restore some sensitivity, drop insulin out, and then go back and repeat this process. So yeah, I do go with the basal insulin first for those reasons, to remove strain off the pancreas, lower your own amount of insulin that you have to produce, and then from there we use in like a fast acting around specific meals that could be having a demand for it, right? So insulin and growth hormone, what I would say is that insulin doesn't necessarily make growth hormone work better just by taking exogenous, because when you're injecting insulin, when you're injecting growth hormone, you're producing your own insulin that's making growth hormone convert to IGF-1 and do that whole process anyway. When we take insulin, we're simply doing is replacing our own production of insulin. That's just way over the top of beyond what we're supposed to be producing, right?
Yeah. John, I have to ask you how many time you have, just because I have a few more questions, and if the time is limited so much, I'm gonna skip the like less important for me.
Yeah, I could do another like 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, I'm gonna ask you about the protein intake. This is just because for years bodybuilders stated that you have to eat a ton of protein. For example, Dante Trudel. who is known as a dog crab. DC training, like a construction physics in bodybuilding. Uh, he bumped up the protein so much, and his guys grew so much. Also, Milo Sarcev is the one who says that there's not such a thing like overeat the protein. More is better. So your like your thing is not bumping up the protein so much, just because you probably doing like a, I don't know how it's the pounds, maybe like a 1 pounds per kilo or 1.5 pounds, even like a 3 grams per kilo of the body weight, for example. But you counted it from the all of the sources, so the
Yeah.
actually meat sources is not that much. So are you think that's it's really sufficient, or if you are will trying to make a monster from like a turn someone into a monster, you think like eating, I don't know, like a 4 grams, 5 grams, 6 grams for a kilo of the body weight is would be better.
I think, man, in bodybuilding, we just love the extreme approach, right? I think that caters so well to our psychology. Like, take sets beyond failure. You need to eat like 3 times your body weight in protein. You need to take 100 IUs of Lantus and then eat like 20 units of growth hormone. And a certain group would be like, absolutely, that makes sense. Thank you for my confirmation bias. Like, you confirmed everything I believed. When you start to challenge that a little bit, like, man, it's people get really like offset in some of the bodybuilding circles, but you have other extremes of guys that don't eat a lot of protein at all and grow very sufficiently. So, you know, I why I like research and the nerdy stuff is because we can wash out the drug equation and control a lot of variables. So you can really see like what makes a normal human grow on average, because there's extremes, right? Outliers. And still, like, man, across a number of studies have looked at this, and uh, you know, 1.8 gram per kilogram up to like 2.7 gram per kilogram is this range you see where you could probably optimize all variables around taking protein. And what I mean by that is some of the lower end of like in that studies, they're just looking at nitrogen balance, like what is the amount to have protein synthesis equal protein degradation, not necessarily grow. So you have to pull all the studies apart, right? And then someone that's on a progressive training program, like what are they all doing? Then there's also other aspects around protein besides just building muscle. Like what about satiety? What about partitioning? Because there's some other research looking at up to 4 gram per kilogram comparatively to, I think it was 3 gram per kilogram, if I remember right. And the protein amount gained, the muscle mass gained, was no different in the subjects, but actually the really high group lost a little bit more body fat, and they had the same amount of calories. So it's like that's some early research, and like, man, maybe a high protein could keep you leaner. Now it's one study, so you can't really say anything around this, but
And it's not on
the issue in that
bodybuilders,
study, if you read,
and they are not
they're not,
using
they were
PEDs,
not.
they're not using like a peptides,
Correct,
like
correct.
IGF,
But
like
but it's
GH, like insulin.
2 gram per pound of body weight. It's 4 gram per kilogram. So it's making a case for really high protein intake. Um, the issue in that study is they struggled so bad to get the food down, and digestion was a mess because of eating so much protein all day, which is kind of funny point of that study. Um, so we at least have a framework to work around. Yeah,
Yeah, but I think the digestion problem is just because they probably are normal human beings who are eating like a probably 0.3 kilograms on a daily, and they are bumping the protein probably next day to 3 or 4 grams, and this is why the digestion problems comes out. Just
well,
because you says there's are many guys who are eating like a less protein and they are huge, but I don't really can like find in my head someone who is eating lesser of the protein and are huge. For example, all of the guys from the Matt Jensen, Milos, or or I don't know, like all of the top coaches is like they are all feeding their guys like a high protein. And I am not saying that this is like the golden rule, but from the history, every guy who was ever a monster eat like a beast when it comes to the protein. Nasser and stuff like that, they are eating a tons of meat, a tons of protein, and they are not counting the proteins from the rice or oatmeals and stuff like that. They are eating like a 400 grams of protein just from the meats and eggs and protein shakes and stuff like that. So this is why the conversation about the like studies and stuff like that, it's okay, but they are not driving the process with the PEDs and the hardcore, really hardcore training and the dedication for that. Just because for those people who are maybe not grew better, they maybe are not hard enough, like a work hard enough for that, or not sleep enough, or just don't have the sufficient amount of the hormones in their body and stuff like that. Maybe this is the reason, not the protein intake. What do you think about it?
Sure. I mean, I think we could take the individual cases and look at how much protein that we're taking. Of course, it's still it's still based on body weight, right? So some of these 300-pound bodybuilders, it's 450 grams of protein per day, which is 1.5. What is that? Maybe 2.8 gram per kilogram, something like that. They're huge guys. So I mean, the amount of protein is large, but I still think it falls within a range that isn't beyond, because like, let me put out what I usually program is 1.3 gram per pound of body weight, around 1 to 1.5. This is usually where I fall, which
But counting from
I don't know.
every
I don't know.
sources, but counting from every
No, no,
sources.
yeah. So that does
Yeah.
count from
So
every source. Now
let's
let me finish like my point here. Um, Now where does any of these numbers even come from, right? It has to be based around something, like at least established in the studies. Like when we look at those studies, that is based around counting all protein from all sources. All right. Now let me give you a drug study. Okay. One of the initial dose response studies in testosterone. Um, oh gosh, now Bazin is the researcher. Put guys on varying doses of testosterone. The highest group was 600 milligrams per week, and this was carried out for 16 weeks, untrained. They didn't even train them, just took drugs. They had their protein take was 1.2 gram per kilogram. Do you know how much muscle those guys put on 16 weeks? It was like 18 pounds. Was it like eight kilogram in 16 weeks with barely any protein? So you very well can make a case that by taking steroids, it makes you more efficient using the protein that you're already taking in and not having a higher requirement than that of a natural. You could very well make a case around that. Because yeah, you maybe are elevating protein synthesis more with training more and drugs, but also you're decreasing protein breakdown a lot too. Now, I wouldn't program around that, but it's my devil's advocate argument, back to that we have drug studies looking at this too. So I
Yeah.
think the middle ground is usually where I would still lie, and programming around this kind of 2.4 to 2.8 gram per kilogram for protein. But I do count it. I do count it from all sources, because you could greatly become inaccurate in your protein intake and your calorie intake by not doing so. And that's what I've seen across the spectrum here, of like when you are shifting in off season to contest prep, when if digestion is really getting poor, you could add 50 grams of protein in just from rice. And then you might want to be shifting some of that protein into fats and carbohydrates that's going to be actually fueling training, if you've already met this threshold that's sufficient for driving protein accretion and decreasing protein breakdown. And any more beyond that, you're just looking at a very expensive fuel source. I don't think more is better for protein, because you can only accrue so much muscle tissue at a rate that you can. Those guys that I talked about that took the drugs and grew really, really fast, no one's doing that once you're like Nasser size. Maybe they're adding like 5 pounds of stage weight a year. So how much total protein does that really equate to across the calendar year? It's not that much extra. I think Justin has a very nerdy, Harris has a very nerdy approach of calculating that all out. But it's you could definitely have arguments that that's not needed. But I think once you are that big of a bodybuilder, that your total protein gain is going to be very, very high because you're big. But I would count sources from all sources.
Yeah, but
because that's how the
just
standards came about.
yeah, but you say they are on 600 milligrams of testosterone and eating like 1.2 grams of protein, but maybe they will grow more if they eat 3 grams.
You have a very valid point.
Yeah, just because I do believe that using a PEDs, turning on your protein synthesis so much that you probably are more sufficient with using the protein. That's for sure. I think that's even not debatable. I said probably wrong, but you know what I mean. Yeah, this is not like you can
Right.
contradict it. But I think that using all the gear and peptides and stuff like that makes you grow even more using more. And you mentioned Justin Harris. He is not counting the proteins from sources like a rice and stuff like that, and he is make eating his guys like a 2.53, 3.5 grams per kilograms. You says that some of the big bodybuilders eat 2.8 grams per kilograms, but they are not counting the rice sources and stuff like that. And they are eating like a 300 grams of oats, 600 grams of rice, and I don't know, avocado, bananas, and stuff like that. They are everything have like a protein, so they probably eating like a 4 grams per kilograms of their body mass. So this is what I came to. Just I think that's you're counting like a. I would say that 3 grams per kilo is sufficient, but if you are not counting the rice and stuff like that, so it's probably more closer to the 3.54 grams per kilo.
Yeah, I think we just need a study where we take all the bodybuilders on high protein and ones on lower
That
and,
will
and
be
to see how
perfect.
they grow differently. So I think you could keep picking apart cases of guys with higher or even lower protein amounts because again, like I've seen it all. Some of these guys they're not on higher protein takes like Hunter Labrada. Like he's one. He's not on an excessive amount of protein. Um, and
I
he's
don't know
still
how
like
many.
one of the biggest guys in growing, right?
Yeah, I don't know
So
how many Hunter eats, so I'm not gonna
yeah,
argue with
he's
you.
like 200 grams of meat, 6 meals a day. That's not excessive.
Yeah, it's not.
When I eat personally 170 grams of meat at my meals. Um, but it's also say like, are we saying like the all the other protein sources added? How much added on top of the meats would make them less complete, right? Because you absolutely do need a certain amount of these complete protein sources.
Yeah, yeah,
And I would say like at least 75% of that needs to come from high quality protein sources like meats and dairy. Because if you have someone that's really high carbohydrate, we're counting all the protein, right? It's like, well, what are they eating? 90 grams of meat per meal. And
yeah.
that's not the case of what I do. A lot of times I'm setting these guys diets up when they're first coming to me earlier on in off season. And it will have they're already not on a lot of carb, they have a higher protein take, and then as we just add in the other grains, that protein take climbs and it does increase. I usually won't pull it out until digestion is an issue. So here's like the real application, right? We talk numbers all day, but this is what I do. And so like if digestion starts to become an issue, then I might start looking at like how high is protein kind of climbed up over this time. Is it getting to a point where I should pull it back some and then allocate that into another macronutrient that would be less issue problematic for digestion? But yeah, I,
Yeah.
I would still count all the protein sources. I don't think you have to though, because most of the time we do eat the same things every day. But you easily could like in a prep or off season run into like your calorie amounts if someone is switching foods out that might blur the assessment a bit.
Yeah, I was not expecting that you're gonna tell me exactly why you think that or that. Just because this is not impossible. You cannot like compare it to with anything. Just because every person is different. So if one eats less and grew more, doesn't mean because the protein. Maybe he's just more genetically have better genetics. Let's say like that.
I,
It's
I
easier.
absolutely think
Yeah,
you should consume a little bit more
than
than
less.
what any minimum recommendation is out there, until it is a problematic of slowing down progress for some reason. So, if you're at, the 2.8 gram per kilogram, I think that's a great starting point for a lot of guys. And that's going to cover a lot of ground. If I'm doing my math right, maybe because I'm usually 1.3 to 1.5. So that should be, goes higher in kilo, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Maybe I'm just doing, I'm doing the conversion wrong here, huh? 0.3
I
times
don't even know what the pounds is. It's
So
probably like
so
almost
so okay.
2.2.
Yeah,
2.2.
no, yeah, 2.2. So let me
Yeah.
correct myself. I did the math. It's what I do is 1.3 to 1.5. So my range for guys, we usually fall 2.9 to 3.3 gram per kilogram.
Yeah.
That's usually
I
where I program in. And that is
I
counting from all sources. Now,
Yeah, I do believe I am a former believer of higher protein, so I do believe that 3 to 4 grams per kilo just from meats, it's enough. That this is what my range stays in. And I just wanna ask you about your approach, just because that was always something that was like a something that I've always wondered watching your videos. Why is the protein so low? This is he like adding in from everything, or this is just a meats protein, or how do you count it? Just because it's seems to be so low for a guy your size. So this is why I ask, and I know that you cannot
so I
say
can eat
that
more
it's
carbs and take more
yeah.
insulin.
Okay, that's fine
Yeah.
for
See,
me.
would you be like, oh hell yeah, yeah? It's so I can take more insulin and eat more carbs.
Yeah, I would rather
I'm just
probably eat
joking.
more protein, just because it was something in my head that would not allow me to lower the protein to that amount. I would shrink in my eyes in probably 30 seconds. Okay, let's come to the PDUs. Do you believe that is something like a safer approach to using PEDs in bodybuilding, in real bodybuilding, like a heavy open bodybuilding?
Oh, I don't know. The term is what's going to throw people off, right? Like
Yeah,
when you say safe,
I'm
it
gonna
sounds like with
explain. I'm gonna explain. Do you believe that the high doses for some individuals are necessity? Just because I know what your approach is, just because I'm on your side, and
yeah.
I'm gonna be clear. I don't believe in it. I think it is just something that you put it in just because it's public, so you don't want to say it out loud. Not let me say it differently, just because it sounds like attack once again. I do believe that you cannot tell the whole thing to the people who are not on this level, just because for some guys it will be scary to hear what the real dosage is, and for some it is not necessary. I do believe that there are guys, probably like Phil Heath or something like that, who are so genetically gifted that they are probably doing less than like a local guy, but for most guys it's probably not possible, I think.
Okay. With so again, I think, remember, for one, I am honest on my site, and you also have to remember in the context who I'm trying to teach this to, right?
Yeah,
And
this is why
it's
I say I
most of
do
the
believe in it.
guys, it's not the top 20 bodybuilders in the world that are coming to the site to like, how do I gain more, right? Those aren't those individuals. But with any PED programming, just like your training or nutrition, it's needs based, and also on the goal and the risk.
Yeah,
So as you get bigger and your goal is to be at the Olympia, you accept more risk and you take more drugs. And for some people, that's going to be a shit ton of drugs, 3-4 grams. That some people do that a week. For some guys, they might never get over 2 grams. I've seen guys running crazy low amounts for how big they are. But for me to come on the site and say, this is what it takes, guys, that would be honest in itself. Because there's also guys that just do stupid shit and take excessive amount of gear that they don't need to. They're in complete denial of what even that needs to happen, right? Because through what I've done, I've started off really high, and through prepping and working, I've improved myself as a bodybuilder to where I get more out of all the other variables, and less gear has actually been required in certain situations. And I think that can happen. But if you're doing everything right, to get bigger, it usually just requires more drug. And yeah, at some point it might take a lot, and you might also have not a lot of downtime, because the Olympia circuit, it's short. So you run a 20-week prep, you have a short post-show phase. How long is your off-season phase before you need to prep again? So the realism is that you're on cycle elevated for a lot of the time to maintain that level of size and then even grow beyond it. So yeah, there is some reality there, but I think that's not the majority of my mass that I speak to on the site. But what I really wanted, and I need to make it clear, I guess, in the site, is that there should be an assessment and a framework and decision and thought. So I don't teach this is the protocol to be an open bodybuilder. I teach these are the questions you need to ask for when you know to escalate the dose. And that should just, and so I have some caps around, like, I think I have as high as like 2.5 grams of usage at some point, kind of capping off at that. But I do think there should probably is some caps between like 2 to 3 grams per week. If you're not like cracking into the pro ranks by then, man, you should probably really reconsider what you're doing here. So that's kind of where I wanted to come out with J3U, is give people the ideas and thought process of how to build up in dosage on their need, the risks that they want to take, and the compound selection as well. But yeah, at some point, if you don't care and you just want to be enormous and the risk doesn't matter, yeah, you just take a bunch of drugs, man, like as much as you want to take. Am I going to say like all pros are taking 5 grams a week? No, because that's not true. So is going back to your question though, is there a safe way to do it? No. Is there a way to reduce risk? Yeah, I think we could maybe program drugs and not be completely ignorant to what we're doing. I think you should have these questions that I have in J3U that assess, are you taking enough, and what should that be based around? And if you're using these questions, you might be able to find areas where maybe you could decrease dosages at times, or you might need more, rather than just throw a more all the time at yourself to cover your bases, right? Hey, it's like, I know 400 grams of protein might work, but I'm just going to take 800 just to be sure. And I think that's where a lot of guys fall, because you have a pressure as a coach and an athlete to deliver on the Olympia stage. So on prep, well, I could take 2 grams, but I'm just going to take 5 grams just to make sure, like, I don't leave anything on the table. And at some point, there's just a ceiling where more doesn't do much more for progress, but just does a lot more for the health risk side. And I think that's where we're trying to balance the equation out, and where you could reduce the risk for some of these guys.
Yeah. Once again, I don't want it to. It sounds like an attack from my side. Just I think this is the social media problem. You see, just because I know that you are putting on your site stuff just for the regular people, not for the huge bodybuilders, and the same you do on the Instagrams and stuff like that. And I don't want to be hypocritical just because I do talk a little bit about the drugs on my Instagram as well, but not I am not talking about the dosages and stuff like that. But I do, and I do know that people are stupid. Let's say it straight. They are stupid. If you says on your site that some people need to take 6 grams of gear on the Olympia stage, there will be 12, 14, 16 years old dude who thinks, oh, he's taking a 6 grams, so probably three. are okay for me, like a half of it. It's great idea.
Sure.
And this is why it looks like you are a man who is just spreading the lies. Let's say it's like that. Just because some people think that you say no, 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 no. You have to take out the trend and stuff like that. Just put some primo, like 100 milligrams a week, and you are ready for the Olympia stage. And you are not saying
No,
that. Yeah. So this is
not at all.
this
Not
is
at all.
this is why I told you that I am not believing in it, just because they are examples of contest preps and stuff like that, and they are like a minimal amount of stuff. And this is something that I wanted to ask you about. Do you really believe that on the contest prep you should lower your doses, and on the off season you should bump it up?
Yeah, so it's going to vary depending on the assessment, right? It's about asking those questions to know where your dose should really head. Because I think you're going to run into other situations where what happens in prep is sometimes guys get dialed in. Like you had some guy with a shitty offseason, all of a sudden their training improves, their routine improves, they're nailing nutrition, and they start like seeing strength go up in the gym. They're like getting stronger. And so this is like my one of my primary metrics that I look at around, do you need more gear or not? Because that's an important question if we're going to look at how do you know even how much to even take? And it should be based around the goal of adding muscle. Now, we're not week by week, we're not measuring muscle mass with a DEXA scan. That would be ridiculous. But the best proxy for hypertrophy is gym performance. So, in general, if we're seeing like load, reps, everything improve across all metrics, there's a good chance you are growing. If we see that in a contest prep, you could be maintaining tissue or hell, even growing into a show. And if we see someone that goes into a prep from a suboptimal offseason state, very well, if we see those metrics increasing, they likely wouldn't need as much gear. We could lower that dose down. Now, you might have other situations where they're coming out of contest prep and they carry out all those great habits they had in prep, and then all their offseason variables improve so much. They might need the same amount of gear as last offseason. It could happen. Or we might have someone that is still go through a bunch of shit in the offseason. Their sleep's poor. They're going through some life stressors, and they're not seeing as much gym performance increase. Well, we have goals, right? So we now push more gear to drive that process along. So now we have a higher amount used in the offseason. So here's the guide. Is gym performance improving? And are the visuals improving and not seeing like excessive body fat gain, or in a contest prep, seeing someone like look the same, like they're not getting harder? And that would kind of guide those decisions. Now, to your question, if you had someone that's doing everything right, I do believe that using less in prep, because the goal of prep is just to maintain tissue. It takes a lot less to maintain tissue than I do believe it takes to build it. Just like in training, training's a stimulus. You need to train a certain amount of effort and volume. And when you have more tools in the off season to recover from it, you drive that hard. And we see like you could lower volume across prep and maintain muscle mass. Easily could do this. The same thing goes around drugs. Like the drugs are this stimulus to help with muscle retention. And so to just maintain that tissue into a prep, you could use less drug. Now, how much less? I think that's maybe the argument, because it's not that different. But the framework is there of asking the questions to know how different it should be. Because then you have to ask, well, how much more? It would be the other question. So if you have some guy that's trying for Olympia and his strength's going down, well, use more drug. If that happens to be more drug than you use in the off season, well, that is what it is. So the thing is not, I would always use less drug in the off season. It's or in prep, sorry. It is assessing the individual's drug requirements for what is the goal they're trying to achieve here, with also keeping in mind the risk, right? But in a generality, I think if you're doing everything right, you could use less drug in prep. I think we also need to consider in that is that the type of drug is changing too. So it's not like we're using a gram of Primo in off season and then a 2 grams of Trin on prep. It's like maybe they're using 400 milligram of Trin, but these drugs differentiate in the toxic levels that they bring. So I think we also see more toxic drugs coming into prep. So if you also want to pile on it a total milligram amount of drug, but also more toxic drug, for one, your risk is very high in prep. But I think the need there isn't for when you look at the off season that we're just escalating just the injectables along the way. And there are some studies out there I could bring up, but I don't see the point around it. I think conceptually that's kind of where I lie on this spectrum. But I do realize a lot of guys use more in prep, but it might be semantics of just how we're counting up the drug totals. I think you might look like, well, I have like 7 different drugs I'm using, but off season I'm only using 3, but maybe these are higher milligram amounts. So my thing is that use the drug you need, the amount, to see out your goal that's within your risk profile. If that's more or less, then it is what it is.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, it makes sense. But I asked just because what you said that you don't need that much to maintain the tissue on the contest prep, but we really don't. I don't believe that we wanted to maintain it. I think we wanted to maybe slightly even build it if it's possible, or just make it harder, more dense, and stuff like that. So I do believe that the contest prep is the time that your probably your PED's total should be the highest. But this is only my approach and my beliefs. I think it's definitely gonna make you look harder, denser, and bigger than lowered it.
And again, it comes down to like what milligram amount are we talking about here? Because it could be kind of nuanced. Because
Yeah, it says we finished
for
the off
one,
season on a 2 grams, and we getting into the contest preps on 2.5 for like a reverse it. We finished the off season
sure,
on a 2, and like going into a show day on like a 2.5 grams, something like that. It's not don't have to be like a double it, but
yeah,
probably some like a test probably will stay the same or just slightly lower. It depends on how much water you are or how much fullness you need. Probably some DHT derivatives comes in a way. Probably like a natural gonna switch from the NPP or something like that to a trend or something like that. And probably we're gonna add some like orals and stuff like that, just the basic stuff. So just from that, probably the total amount's gonna be higher than on a contest preps when you like on an off season when you have probably like a test, maybe EQ or an NPP, just because I do not believe in Primo and we talk about it. But yeah,
sure, yeah. Again, it comes back to the question like, is gym performance improving and are we retaining tissue? If you want to build tissue into a prep, yeah, it just that requires more drug than it would in the off season because you're moving into a state that has poor recovery variables, right? Sleep's deranged. Your weight training no longer has the same stimulus. You're now on less food, so you're not going to recover as much. So to make up that recovery, you have to have a higher drug amount than it would even take
yeah,
to
but
grow into that show.
going into your thought process, you says you don't need that much to maintain, and then you says if you wanted to build it in the contest prep, why you don't want it to build muscle in the contest prep?
Because if you look at the Olympia schedule, you're now running high amounts of drugs all year long. And if your plan is to be a pro Olympian for the next 10 years, you can't just run high drugs all year round. So this is when the rationale of also thinking past the next 12 weeks, 16 weeks has to come into play because all right, we want to grow into the show. We're going to run a bunch of drugs. The reality of an experienced bodybuilder growing in prep, it rarely happens. It
Yeah,
rarely happens if you've been doing everything right.
but I
Sure, you
think
could give like, what about Kevin Levrone? Like that guy didn't even work
nah,
out and
no.
then started prepping.
Yeah, yeah. Don't say
So
about
so
those individuals, but because they are
you you'd have to come
very
from a
rare.
detrained state
Yeah.
of some sort, right? Um, or hell, even if you come down to a basal level of gear, like for a lot of guys, we're cruising on 400 or 500 milligrams of gear, and you can maintain size on that. People do that.
Yeah.
So it just takes a little bit more to now maintain if you're trying to diet body fat off, but that a dose should escalate as you get leaner. And maybe those last weeks you throw in some
Yeah.
orals, and maybe it does climb a little
This is
higher
this
in
is
your
what I
off
mean.
season.
I am not saying that you are bumping it up from the get going like for the first day of your prep. No, no, no. I said was maybe like a last 6 weeks of the contest prep. So it's probably not going to be that long of a time, especially if you are already qualify for the Olympia. So this is probably you doing a one show, and then you have like a period of probably 3 to 4 months to clean up, and then starting your off season and doing it again. So it's probably like I think it's probably a sufficient time to do it.
Again, you just
Unless
need you need a
unless you
decision process
yeah. Yeah.
to use the drugs. Like if you just throw them in for a while, like what's your rationale of I need this milligram amount, I need this drug in place, because eventually you're just throwing drugs on top of drugs because of some protocol that's been handed down.
No, no, no,
And
no.
that's what I've seen.
Don't get me wrong. I am not saying that you are always trying to bump it up. I say that probably if in some point of the year your PD is going to be the highest, it's going to be the last weeks of the contest prep. I think not like a last weeks of the off season. It, I think so. Just because if you are in off season, you are in a state of anabolism, 24 hours a day, just because you have like a sufficient amount of hormones and calories. But in the contest prep, you do not have the luxury of the calories. So this is why it's for me it's rational to bump it up the PEDs. So maybe even go a little bit lower in the off season just to be a little bit healthier, to just to bump it up in the last 6 weeks on the of the contest prep. This is like my thought process.
I think it could be very close. I mean, with the off season, you're going to get to a point where mass is going to be very slow to accrual, and to push up beyond. If you're saying like what rate do you need to see within the time frame too, and I think that's something to consider for an Olympian. If you really need to move up stage weight and you only have this 16-week bout, you might have to really push it in that phase versus someone that is doing an extended off season. That phase might be drawn out and you might be using a lower dose. But in the later stages of prep, what brings about the rationale of using orals? And I think we start labeling each drug does something special. When big picture, all these drugs work on the androgen receptor. That's the main role of a steroid.
Yeah.
They're not, because I know you brought up making you hard. And I would ask, how does a steroid make you hard?
It's more like a making you
Well, to
hard.
answer,
Yeah, yeah. Continue. Sorry for interrupt. Continue.
yeah, I mean, the main role the drug has is working on muscle tissue to bind to the androgen receptor to build proteins, right? They have some roles in fat loss, but to make someone look visually harder, it's going to be either losing body fat or manipulating water. That's the only two ways. So is steroids great at losing body fat? Well, no, not necessarily. It does a little bit, but there's a lot of other drugs that do that well. How does it work with water? Well, a lot of times upping through steroids, it could make you retain water. Now, certain drugs might offset the androgen to estrogen ratio. That could potentially make you a bit harder. I don't see that being the best rationale to use them. And usually once I've layered in an oral of choice, I don't see much else brought in from stacking more orals on top of it. Usually the issue with guys holding water the last weeks is manipulation of fatigue. It's usually they need to pull back and the cortisol is too high. That makes you retain water. You need to manage that aspect, manage the training variables better. And I think that's where you're seeing higher drug use. For one, is because of mismanaged preps, not watching someone close enough fatigue and training wise to start pulling them back when you need to. And instead, you're adding more drug in hopes to make them hard when that's not even the root issue, because that's when we ask, how does a steroid make you hard? And if it's through water or body fat, address the root causes of water and body fat. And so adding in all the orals on top the last week and seeing that milligram amount climb up, that might not always make you better either, because it can drive more inflammation. It cause more GI distress, and more sleep derangement. It can make someone worse. So I would just say, make sure you're asking the right questions the last week to deploy the correct thing for each case. And what I'd say, if you're needing to add more in the last weeks of prep, is watch gym performance closely. When gym performance is tanking, and this is with consideration that you don't chase that logbook too hard, but in like certain exercises are going to drop off, but that's when makes a great rationale for using an oral. But you don't need all four of them in, you know?
Yeah, of course.
So I think a lot of cases, it's just someone's not managing the variables closely. And I know a lot of these coaches you might look at in the protocols, because I've done them, they're not watching their athletes close the last weeks of modulating all the hard stuff around coaching, the daily check-ins, pulling back training volume, putting in cardio, pulling back cardio, managing all those aspects is where you're going to see lower drug usage. And those are the coaches that are asking the right questions, rather than here's the protocol, you take more gear and that's what we do. And I'm not going to really look at all your variables closely.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say that the terms making you dry or making you hard is more like a semantics. It's more like, if you are bumping up the androgens, you're probably your metabolic rate will be slightly higher, your strength will be slightly like a more visible and not noticeable. So you're probably gonna go a little bit harder on the last weeks, and probably you're gonna stay a little bit fuller. So actually you can probably like retain more like a glycogen into your muscle. So probably the visuals are gonna be a little bit better, just because your skin's gonna be a little bit tighter. And I am not saying that's given like a Vinstrol or something like that's gonna make your skin like a dry out, something like that. That's not what I meant to. It's more like a visual look. Do the all the indirect like pathways. I think, and you mentioned that you can like have problems with your digestions and stuff like that. Isn't that's gonna be more noticeable in the off season when you bump it up the androgens, when you have already high amounts of like a stress on your gut?
Yeah, I think they're for different reasons. I think we're having to more so manage food volumes, which is getting more problematic versus the drug load driving the problem. And again, like if you run into a problem, well, you're back down on your drugs, of course. I think in the prep though, if you're running that many orals, the orals have the mechanism to definitely drive more GI distress, increase acid production. Guys start getting reflux. Then if it starts also impacting sleep, it's kind of this
Yeah.
snowball effect, right? Sleep gets impact, that also impacts like digestion and bloating the next day. So it's going different ways for each reason. To your other point, around like the different mechanisms, indirect mechanisms potentially, I would want to make sure we pull all those out, just to again make sure you use the drugs for the right issue. It's like, well, how does a steroid thin the skin? What is that? I don't know of that
It's
mechanism of
not. It's
action.
not. It's not.
Um,
I don't
right. So it's
say
just
it.
losing body fat. Just
I said
so
this is indirect. So by making you go harder on the gym, you're probably going to lose more fats, just because you are just getting like a more hard work on the gym. So you probably burn more calories. So you're probably gonna
yeah.
burn
So
more like a fat, and then you're probably gonna stay a little bit fuller from the drugs. So it's gonna be a visual changes, not like a direct changes, not because you're taking the orals or something like that. And also, I am not saying you that you have to stack the orals. I just say that you probably can like bump it up a little bit, the injectables, for example, a little bit more tren or a little bit more test if you want to be a bit fuller or something like that, or even bump it up the GH if you are not holding so much water and you don't have the problem with this. So it's like many options to choose. You don't have to bump it up the orals by any means.
I think, and like what you're stating, it's you're analyzing the individual for based around their
Of,
need. Like
of course, yeah.
obviously, if you're done,
Bodybuilding is not general.
yeah, I
You have
mean,
to, yeah.
so like, but you bring about the points of like this is why we should use more drugs. So, I want to also have like the counterpoints of if you're having to take a steroid to just train harder, that might not be your best tool to use, right? Like maybe a stimulant would have more, like a clenbuterol might have more action, or for metabolic function, you brought up that, like, are we already using like those clenbuterols, yohimbis, or thyroid hormone? Like that would probably, like the steroids probably already maxing out any of those indirect actions around fullness. What is the need there? Like if you need someone to get leaner, as long as gym performance is holding, we can take care of fullness like the last week. We just bringing up carbs, or maybe even having some other compounds that bring in fullness too. Like you mentioned, maybe there would be leaving in growth hormone, or some action around that. But I just want to drill in, like the main reason that we are escalating an androgen would be around muscle retention and gym performance. And there might be a better tool for the other jobs that could be mentioned around if it's fat burning or hunger management, or whatever the case may be.
The best thing is that I'm totally agreeing with you. I just wanted to clarify. Yeah, yeah, I am totally agree with you.
Yeah, no,
You
no,
have
I know,
to.
I know.
Yeah, I just mention it just because with every coach I speak, they are always agreeing that the higher amount of the PED is in the year is just right before the competition, and you're the only one that I've heard opposites, and this is why this I even
Sometimes
yeah the
for myself,
sometimes
it is.
yeah the sometimes is
Myself,
the
it is.
part is the part I've never heard before. So this is why I assuming that this is your like a thing that you are trying to like putting the year, like if you are planning the year for the competitor, you're planning it like we're gonna bump it up the dose, and then we're gonna slightly taper it down, just going into a prep. This is what I thought. This is why I ask. So this is not like I'm telling you that I am right, you are wrong. This is I more wanted to clarify, just because this was the biggest thing that was difference you from the other coaches I spoke before. So this is why I wanted to clarify that.
Let me like, for my own prep, that is true. Um, you need context within that, right? Like I've been 212 for a long period of time. I also have managed my own variables for a long period of time. I've gotten very good at it. So I know I can escalate higher in the off season, and I know now what I need in a prep, and it can be a lower amount than the off season. Is it much less? It's not terribly much less, but it is. Now, for others, my other clients, it will depend based around the things I talk about, assessing them. So it's likely maybe it could escalate for some, but for some it doesn't. And I think we operate in a coaching gray area where if you say always, never, you're going to find yourself cornered in a spot where you're going to have to either you'll be ignorant and not have the tool to deploy a job, or you'll just be wrong.
Yeah,
So
of
I think
course.
keep an open mind that there's things out there where it's sometimes or rarely that these things do apply. But for the calendar year, yeah, I have a rough framework of usage, but again, it still comes down to assessing the need and the goal, right? If I have someone that's going to the Olympia stage and I'm not seeing the things happen that need to happen, we might be escalating the PEDs. But I know the right questions to ask to make sure that is the tool to use. I
Yeah.
don't just have the blanket protocol that everybody on my whole roster is getting this done because I don't know that's what works. No, everyone's getting assessed and their need is based for their own individual goal and need, right?
Yeah.
For some that could be less, for some it could be more.
Yeah, this
It
is
depends
something
on the
that
phase they're in, and it changes throughout the year.
yeah, this is something that lost on social media as well. Just because most likely you talk loud about stuff that's more suitable for everyone. And sometimes if you talk about the outlier and something, get it out into perspective, it could sound like you says that this is my way. And like you said, it's not. And this
Well,
is, yeah,
it's so hard on social media because
it
like,
is, it is. This is why we're doing this
oh
today.
man,
It's
you get like
trying to
20
clarify.
20 seconds. You get 20 seconds to tell someone something. So it like has to be kind of generalized.
Yeah,
And if it is
yeah.
too specific, they tear you apart either way. You can't win. So you know, come into the course and J3U and I can teach you. And I have all my preps documented on there. Like you see exactly what I run at the level I run. That's just me though. Like, but I try to teach the thinking process through that. And you probably went through, and I'm still going back through and trying to bring more clarity to these lectures because I have individuals like you that ask me questions. I'm like, man, I should make this clear. So as I go through it and I have better ways to teach, and areas where I'm like, man, I didn't cover this good enough, that I keep going through and redoing lectures so I can make sure that message is clear and cover enough ground for everyone. So, I appreciate the questions that you ask around this because it helps me just try to get better as an educator. And I have no dog in the fight as far as like I want to push out a certain message.
Yeah, of
My
course.
my own goal is just being a better bodybuilder, like anyone that comes to me. And if that means a lot of gear or it doesn't, then that is what it is. I also want to be a smart bodybuilder and try to decrease my risk and not be stupid about it. So that is what I teach. Um,
John, I know I've
and
stretched out your time mark a lot, so this is why I'm going to leave the rest of the questions and ask you last one, because this is one that's just can't get out of my head. Because I know you are believing it not using an AI or using it in very limited amount and just replaces with the DHD derivative. Why
sure,
do you think it's a healthier approach?
man, that's a big last question. Um, so for one, okay, I would like that has to get into like general cycle frameworks, and I've done both. Either way, I think you first have to discuss like on a milligram amount, all these drugs build muscle pretty close to the same. And we see others that state this as well, because I've seen big bodybuilders, say Jordan Peters, he stated like just fill the syringe up
Yeah,
with X amount of drug and I'll just take it. Justin Harris mentioned on your podcast that he would just mix it all in like a vial and just
the
shoot it,
same.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like if you take enough milligram amount, you'll grow about the same. Where these drugs start to differentiate is side effect profiles. Because we could say like, hey, if you filled that same syringe up with all trin versus all primo, it's going to be a little different type of ride,
yeah.
right? It's going to hit a little different. Um, so so building out the drug framework, it's like, okay, what is the total milligram amount that you would need to grow? That's the first question. The total dose is what matters the most. From there, how you want to divide that out, the compounds should be based around side effect management, and that's where they differentiate. I believe testosterone should be a base because we still see with testosterone brings estradiol, and all the studies around looking at testosterone with estrogen comparatively to other compounds that don't have estrogen present, that's what's bring about the neuroprotective effects for the brain, for the heart, for your kidneys. Estradiol is very protective in its role. When we have that same testosterone dosage taken with an AI and you lower that estrogen down to a low amount, we see that neuroprotective, cardioprotective, kidney protective effect removed. So lowering estrogen to an excessive low amount is definitely a bad thing. So baseline cycle design is elevate testosterone as high as you can tolerate prior to the need of an AI. That's the first step, right? As much as you need to grow before you run into a side effect with testosterone. That varies all across the board for individuals.
Yeah,
Um,
but my
and
question is,
what's
what's wrong
sure.
with an AI? AI, just because you says that lowering it too much is bringing the danger, and I believe in it.
Yes.
But
Yes.
isn't that just like a you could have uh, your AI, for example, like exemestane or arimidex or something like that, but using it just a little bit to bring it down your estrogen to, let's say, like a higher or a little bit above of the range, and keep it at that, just to keep a healthier lipid profile and stuff like that, without like a side effects coming through, bringing it to a zero or something like that, and at the same time not using DHT derivatives, and they are probably going to impact your HDL. And for me, it's make no sense. Like I would rather use something like Nandrolone or even EQ than a Primo, just because I don't think that Primo. I don't know personally anyone who's getting big on Primo. Maybe just like a to maintain the size on Primo, it's fine. But getting big on Primo, I don't think so. Probably no one does that. Probably every bodybuilder who is growing up to the size using something like test NPP EQ or mix like something like that. So why to use something that's probably gonna bring you less benefits when it comes to the building muscle, probably more negatives when it comes to your HDL, and probably is gonna be working just as well as a little amounts of EI. Just because I don't say use 25 milligrams of EXA, use like a 6.2, just maybe even every other day if it's sufficient for you. Just remember to take it with your lipids, just because it's lipid soluble, and you're probably gonna be fine. What do you think about it? Of
Yeah. So like the original creation of these AIs was treatment of breast cancer, right?
course.
Before that, they used all the other DHT derivatives and even
Yeah.
nandrolone. Those were all for breast cancer. So it's like where they're just trying to lower estrogen and offset it with these other drugs. And then they got better drugs, which were AIs and SERMs. And so they have longer term trials looking at breast cancer and using AIs. Now, this again, it doesn't necessarily apply to bodybuilders, but we try to pull out what we can from these studies. It looks like there is a direct action of the molecule on the endothelial cells around blood vessels and the heart that could cause damage. So it potentially could be a direct mechanism of those drugs around damaging the heart. Now, very well, so if that didn't happen, if you just brought estrogen down to what you're able to tolerate, which is as high as you could, and you compared that to say test in some other molecule that doesn't aromatize, what is the difference in health outcomes? I couldn't tell you, because for one, those studies don't necessarily really exist.
But you
Would I
don't
say
think
the
that
growth
DHT
outcomes would be?
derivatives impacted the lipids profile, like a
I
master
think
or
the total
Primo?
I think the total dosage is probably more impactful, because what you would be doing is you'd have to lower your testosterone and replace it with DHT versus have testosterone up where it was and then adding an AI, which likely would impact your lipids because you're still lowering estradiol.
Yeah, but to
So
the not much, like to the norm. So probably you're gonna be fine. Obviously, your cholesterol will not gonna
no, no,
be normal, just because the testosterone, your body would not have to uh, put it into the translation all of the cholesterol in your body just to make it the androgens, just because you give it to him. But so it's gonna be impacted anyways. But I think that's
your
with
androgen
using,
to estrogen ratio would differentiate
and
either way.
so
So
it's
you'd
gonna.
have this test to estrogen ratio, or you have a test plus a DHT to estrogen ratio. The total androgen load is still going to be impactful on the lipid profile. You'd also need to be consideration that there's different levels of aromatase enzymes in different parts of the brain. So it could be more impactful, like for aromatase at the neural level or at the liver level, which also impacting aromatase at that level could impact your GH to IGF-1 conversion. So you might have some potential where your growth hormone might not have the best synergy along with using and AI.
But we
Now,
say about something certain and I because I know that maybe something like serums like the tamoxifen or loroxifan can do it, but I never heard that something like Exa or Arimidex could make it.
well, I think the problem lies in the actual application of how these guys use it, because most guys aren't monitoring the blood work except every 12, 16 weeks to say like, oh yeah, my estrogen was like not
Yeah,
just right. It's like, no, man, what let's talk reality. What happens here? Because I see these protocols. Here's 1,200 mgs of trim, start 1 milligram of Arimidex every day, 20 milligrams of Novodex. That's your cycle design. That is what I see. It's
yeah.
not what we're talking about, like, oh yeah, you're going to titrate
Yeah,
this down. That
but
doesn't happen.
let's says John that we are talking about people who have brains, not the cookie cutter coaches. Just because when I see
But
the
then they
plan
don't
that
matter because they're actually
yeah
thinking.
yeah,
So
but
if you're
the
rationally going to use
my
an AI,
question my question is what it's it is really necessary to make it like a transition from the AI to the like what is healthier? What is healthier in your opinion? And it's really that unhealthy to use AI just because I think that AI is right now is like a demonized and it's a very
I
great tool
I think
using correctly.
I think it would be overly demonized, but I don't think this is applying to the population that we're trying to speak to. That's not just using testosterone. I think we're all moving up to using other androgens on top of it. I'd rather bring in another drug that's going to build muscle versus an AI, and then also bring in another drug. So now I have 3 drugs in place and more to manage. It's much easier just to manage 2 drugs. Now, do I think Primo is going to make you not get big? No, I don't believe that, because we just talked about the total milligram amount is what matters the most. Now, Nandrolone or EQ, whatever, like some might cause some greater water retention. That fools a lot of people into thinking that's driving more size. But I'm for whatever.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah.
like, hey, I took all these different ones, I grow more off Nandrolone. Yeah, take Nandrolone then. Like whichever you have the best effect with and less side effect, pair that with your testosterone and drive that up as your secondary compound. But I would say, like, hey, if you bring testosterone up to that point, if you need to grow more and you are like, well, I'll put in an AI, I'll raise my testosterone up even more. Yeah, that could be a viable approach. It you would have to really see what would be the difference for that individual comparatively, and also application wise, what's reasonable to manage for them to keep the right ratios. But in my experience, like bringing in the DHT molecule has panned out to be long term what's easier to manage and still get like really good growth without. I haven't used an AI on most of my guys in a while, but not to say that it won't happen. I just think it doesn't need to be our mainstay approach and or demonized, like you said, because I don't
Yeah.
think they're inherently wrong to use, but they do get overly used from what I usually see.
Yeah, I have to agree with you with one thing. I am saying to everyone that doesn't matter what you put into your syringe until the total milligrams for the week is sufficient. But for some reason, I am not believing in Primo, and I don't know why. So this is a point for you for sure. That yeah, this is yeah, well, you got me there. But I
The
just
primo is always fake. It's always
yeah,
fake. That's why.
that could be a reason. Just because you see, I never heard about any like a guy who is I'm not saying at your or Jordan levels. Just because right now you are not building a lot muscle, so
Sure.
it's not
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
that visible. So all of those guys who are doing a big jumps using something like a base, not like a primal. Primal is more like an exotic drug. Let's be realistic. So this is why my thought process is always like a Primo isn't for because I have many clients who wanted to use Primo instead of something like a I don't know like a they wanted to use 300 of Primo for like that 300 milligrams of NPP just because they are heard that Primo is the deal. Primo is the deal, and I do not believe that they are gonna grow better on 300 Primo than 300 of NPP just because I don't think that anyone should use primal less than gram. let's be let's
Well,
be
I see.
yeah.
I would have to. I would disagree. I would disagree
Yeah,
there.
I was joking.
Um,
Of course, I was joking.
no, no, I know, I know. I just mean it's not like when Nandrolone, you just get the water retention that occurs. So I mean, you drive body weight up higher, and maybe there's extra leverages and more gym performance, and connective tissue might be better, and as a net result, you add more size that way. But and then I usually don't go with primo either because it's most people don't get the real stuff. I see
Yeah.
so much that's just EQ. So you're almost better off just getting EQ. I've used a lot of Masteron, which I know that's a huge thing. Like people never use Masteron in the off
Yeah.
season. That's probably like, oh, that doesn't even build muscle. Like that doesn't even work. It's like, well, then we shouldn't even take the fucking drug. Even in prep, why would we even take Masteron if it doesn't do anything for muscle? Um, so I would just say like rotate through them and see what you get best along with to manage sides and also get the outcome that you want. And then let that be your main player that you're increasing.
Okay, and let's leave it like that. Just because I just take you almost 2 hours of your life, and I am never gonna pay that debit from you. Thank you so
We
much,
went a little
John.
beyond time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that you take your time from your precious life, just because right now you are preparing, even though it's 15 weeks out, still you're probably mentally on that Olympia stage. So I rather leave you there than just sitting here with me and thinking about your placing and what you're gonna do on stage. And I'm gonna wanted to say that I wish you well, and I'm watching all of your videos except of those one which is 1 hour long. But I'm gonna,
Dude, that's the best one.
yeah, I'm gonna split it to my 25 session 6 times a week, so it's gonna suit perfectly for almost 5 days, almost. So thank you for that, and that's all for today. If you wanted to say something, if you wanted to, I don't know, like advertise your content or your sponsors or anything, this is the time for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, thank you for having me on. I know we went a bit over, but I could talk about we could probably talk about this stuff all day long. And I appreciate the questioning of my thought process and being able to speak on it. And thank you for investing in J3 University as well. And on that topic, like if anyone is interested in like basically j3university.com is my passion to just educate and try to just get better at bodybuilding. So if you want to the A to Z on how to bodybuild and elevate your game, that is what I teach on there. We now have like the female module, which has all around female PED usage and training and the differentiations between what males and females. We also have a hypertrophy training course as well. I'm not doing any more individual coaching, purely just doing the education work. So you want to follow more of my journey, at John Jewett3 for Instagram, or just John Jewett on YouTube. I post all my prep videos and things like that. And Animal is my sponsor, so shout out to those guys for standing along me for so long. But anyway, Dawid, I truly appreciate it and having me on, and thank you again.
So all of the links that Jones just mentioned, I'm gonna find in the description box below. Thank you for watching, guys, and see you next time. Thank you.